In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the very best way to study in an AP class, whether you're in AP Government or AP US History, or for that matter, really any other AP class. This three-stage study method is, I'm convinced, the best way to study for not only unit tests, but also for the AP exam. In AP Government, the multiple choice section of the exam is worth 50% of the overall score. In AP History, it's 40%. But as you can see in both classes, the multiple choice makes up the biggest or one of the biggest parts of the exam. So this video is primarily going to show you how to study for the multiple choice section by studying with multiple choice. Now, obviously, there are other parts to the exam. In government, we have FRQs. In US history, we have short answer questions, long essays, DBQ essays. But this method is going to help you review, master, and express your knowledge of the material in all of those areas. Primarily, this is designed to show you how to ace the multiple choice part of the exam, but you'll see that the benefits extend to really the entire exam. First of all, what you're looking at right now is a handout that I'm assuming by this point I've already given to you or shared with you. It kind of gives you an overview of what I call the three-stage study plan. We all know, and I'm not going to belabor the point, that cramming for a test doesn't work. There's just no way on earth you could cram for an AP exam. If you sat down to study for the AP exam the night before, I would say just give up. By that point, it is way too late. And really, that applies to every test throughout the year, any unit test. Studying and trying to cram in a bunch of information the night before just never works. So the three-stage study plan is designed to get you to start studying earlier and to study more effectively. Now, notice what I'm not saying is to study more. I'm not going to put an amount of time on studying for, say, a unit test. Obviously, the more time you invest in studying, the better off you'll be. But let's just say that you were going to spend 2 hours studying for a unit test the night before. That won't work. If you could spread that 2 hours out over maybe several days to a week before the test and do it in these three stages, you will find that that's going to produce a much greater result. So very quickly, in stage one, you're going to do what's called a general review. So I often ask students, what does studying look like? When you study for a test, what does it look like? And students often tell me, 95% of the time, they'll say, well, I look over my notes, or I reread the notes you've provided us. That can't really be all we do when we study. I like to use this analogy. If you were on the football team and you were preparing for a big game on Friday night, and I said, okay, how are you preparing for the game? I've never had a football player tell me, well, I just reviewed my playbook. I just looked over the playbook that coach gave me. Every athlete knows that you don't prepare for a big game by simply looking at your notes, looking at your playbook. You have to practice what it is that you're going to do in the game. You have to run through those plays. But that doesn't mean we don't look at our playbook, okay? So in stage one, what I call general review, that is the one part of studying where, yeah, you would look over your notes. You would look at the notes I've provided. You might reread parts of the textbook. If you're in AP Government, you might visit Quizlet to review vocabulary. If you have a test prep book, you might read some of the summaries there. General review is just kind of refreshing your memory on most of the major content in the unit. But it really is stage one, and it's only effective if it's done well before the test, ideally 5 to 7 days. Now, many of you know by now that in my courses, I give you a mid-unit quiz. That mid-unit quiz is often scheduled intentionally to be 5 to 7 days before the test. So if you're looking over your notes to prepare for that mid-unit quiz, you've already begun to study for the test. You're already doing stage one. Now, stage two is what I think is the most important part of studying. This is what this video is primarily going to be about, the practicing. And again, we're talking primarily about the multiple choice. The best way to study for an AP multiple choice exam is to study with multiple choice questions. Now, I'm going to show you where to find these, and I'm going to show you the proper method of how to do this. Note well, what I'm not telling you to do is simply take some multiple choice practice tests or practice quizzes and see how you do. You might get them all right, and that might lead you to think you're very ready for the test. But it's possible that was a very easy quiz or practice test, and maybe you're not that ready. Or you might get them all wrong and your confidence will be crushed. That doesn't mean you're not ready. We're practicing with multiple choice. We're not just taking a practice test. More on that in a minute. Throughout this process, though, if you go back to stage one and stage two, you should always be making notes of what I like to call the stuff I don't know. If in reviewing your notes in stage one, you encounter a topic where you would say, wow, I really don't remember much about that. I was out that day, or, we didn't really go over that much in class, but I know it's important. The blue sheet tells me it's important. You might want to make a note to go and look at that one more time. Likewise, in stage two, when you're practicing, if you encounter some questions that include material that you know is important, you know it might be on the test, but you don't grasp it yet, make a note of it. Because in stage three, the very last part of studying, maybe the night before the test, that's where you want to focus in on simply that stuff I don't know. Hopefully by this point, there isn't much. You'll notice, I know you're not seeing this full screen, but you'll notice that this handout is an inverted triangle. And that's to suggest that in stage one, general review, you are really reviewing everything in the unit, quite a bit of material. Stage two practice, you're probably encountering questions on some of the material, some of the most important stuff. And by now, what you need to study or what you don't feel good about is getting less and less. Finally, in the third stage, where you're focusing in on and reviewing or asking questions about the few things that still trip you up, by this point, what you still don't know for the test is getting less and less, hopefully down to nothing. All right, so this is designed to give you an overview of how to study. Now let's hone in on how to do this. There's another handout that by now you should have or you should find available to you. It basically summarizes everything I'm going to present in this video. I'm not going to walk you through every one of these bullet points, but I've given it to you so that you have it for reference as you develop this habit of studying with multiple choice. But the first step is to find good multiple choice questions to study with. And I've tried to make that very easy for you. So the first thing you might want to do is go to my website. This is not the only place you can get these questions. If you have test prep books, whether I've given you one or you've purchased one, maybe your textbook has some questions. If you're a fan of Khan Academy, they have good practice tests and practice questions. Really, there's lots of sources out there for these, including the College Board's own website. But for now, you can find many on my website. So choose the course you're in, whether it's AP Government or AP History, and you're going to go to the drop-down menu and click on Study. When this page opens up, you will find a couple of things. You'll find many of these handouts that I'm talking about. You'll find a summary of the three-stage study plan and some resources that you can use in each stage. You'll find some resources for practicing with multiple choice, AP Classroom, Khan Academy, as I mentioned. You will find a handout that if you prefer, you can use, download, and print for keeping track of the stuff you don't know. But here on the right side, I've organized practice questions for you by unit. So decide what unit we are in, and be careful, sometimes units overlap or questions overlap, so you want to always remember what the material in the unit was. Keep your blue sheet handy as a guide. If you encounter a question that you would say, I don't think we've talked about that at all, you're probably right, and that's not a good question to use. But choose the unit and then click on any of these links where it says set 1 or set 2 or 3 or 4. These are PDF files that will open up. Find many, many questions here. And you'll notice that the answer is often right there for you. That's okay. Remember, we're not taking a practice test or quiz to see how we do. We're going to be using these questions to effectively study. All right, so how do we go about doing this? Well, let's choose a question that we'll use as our example. Let's go with number 6 here. This is an AP government question, but one that certainly could even appear in AP US history. So I think this will benefit both of you, both classes. Now, remember that what we're doing here is not trying to just quickly get the answer right. Okay, that defeats the purpose. It's right there. The answer is C. The goal of studying with multiple choice is to study. It's to think. It's to review this material in our minds to see what we know, what we don't know, to see what's important, and then to try to lock that into our long-time memory. So when you approach these questions, you have to do it the right way. I often ask students who maybe are struggling, well, are you studying with multiple choice? And sometimes they'll say, yeah, I'm using those questions on your website. And I'll say, well, okay, well, how are you doing it? And they say, well, I look at them and I try to answer them and I see if I got them right. No, that's not what we're doing. This is a very kind of a slow method for using these questions to study. So here are the key steps to doing this. And sometimes I recommend, if you're using these PDFs, you might want to print them. I know some students don't want to see that best answer there on the left. So either cover it up and hide it, or if you do print them, you can cut it off. First thing we want to do is we want to look at the question itself, the prompt. Ignore the answer choices. We want to read it carefully, thinking about what it is asking. So it says, which of the following was a provision of the Articles of Confederation that contributed directly to a weak central government? Do we understand all the key words in this question? Do we know what the Articles of Confederation is? Do we know what they mean by a weak central government? Do we see that they want us to identify a provision of the Articles and one that led to or supports the idea that the central government was weak? So step 1 is to make sure you understand the question. Then I want you to brainstorm. I want you to resist the temptation to look at the answer choices. Many of you have heard me use this analogy before. Answering multiple choice is like going to a restaurant when you're really, really hungry. Whenever you go into a restaurant and you're really hungry and you look at the menu and you see all those options, often they all look good to you. You're so hungry that you'll eat anything. And a lot of times when we take a multiple choice test and we look at the choices right away, they all look good to us. We're so hungry for that right answer that we can be tempted by any of them. And that's not a good way to make a decision at a restaurant, and it's really not a good way to make a decision on a test. So the key second step, once we understand what the question is asking and what all the words mean, we need to pause, really pause. This could take 30 seconds to a minute, and we need to brainstorm answers to the question. We need to not look at the choices, not rely on what is given to us. We need to rely solely on our brain and ask ourselves, what are the provisions of the Articles of Confederation that I know? Can I name several? And which of them do I think contributed directly to a weak central government? Could I come up with the answer to this question? Not by choosing the best one from a list. Pretend for a minute that it's a fill in the blank or an extended response? Could I answer it based on my knowledge? Now, this is key. If you sit there for 30 seconds or a minute and you say, I can't think of one provision in the Articles of Confederation, that's actually a good thing. Now, it's not a good thing if you're taking the test. If you're studying with multiple choice and you discover that you just don't know something, good. Better now than later. This is a topic you're going to want to write down. You're going to have to go back and study this. But assuming that you can name some provisions of the Articles, and hopefully several, hopefully right off the bat you're saying, well, I know Congress couldn't tax under the Articles. I know they couldn't regulate commerce. I know there was no separate executive branch. There was no national judiciary. I know that all the power really rested with the states. States were sovereign under the Articles of Confederation. There was only a Congress, and Congress was itself pretty weak. It was a unicameral Congress, one body, not a House and a Senate like we'll have later under the Constitution. If you're able to do that, if you're able to mentally recall all of that, for one, you should be gaining confidence that I'm ready for this test. I know my stuff. Also, when we do, and we're not there yet, but when we do look at the answer choices, things should get a lot clearer. Let me go back for a second to my restaurant analogy. If you go to a restaurant and you're really, really hungry and you sit down and you start to look at the menu, but you stop first and brainstorm and say, okay, let me think. I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat meat. And I'm really, really hungry, so I'm not going to limit myself to just an appetizer or a salad. And perhaps I'm diabetic and I'm not going to go right to the desserts. If you do that first, that big menu suddenly becomes a lot smaller. Where you're looking to choose what you're going to have for dinner just got a lot easier because you've already brainstormed some things. That's what we want to do with multiple choice. We want to think first. I'm going to say something that you've probably heard before, but it bears repeating. We have to be active when we study. We have to be active when we do anything. Rarely do we get good at anything by just being passive, by just sitting there, by watching, by doing something rather passive, like reading or looking at our notes. We have to be active if we're going to learn. I don't know how you feel about me or all your teachers, but some people look at teachers and like, wow, they really know a lot. And it's like, well, we know a lot in our area because we practice it every day. We teach it every day. And that strengthens our knowledge. That strengthens our skill. And that would be true of anybody in any profession. So studying has to be active. You can't sit there and just look at the answers. You have to think. Okay? So take the time. This is the most time-consuming part of this method, is to read the question and then think about the possible answers. Okay, and remember, if you don't know anything about the topic, okay, write it down. Go look at that again. Go study that again. All right, let's move on to the next step. And we're getting close to the end here, but now we're going to look at the answer choices. And again, whether you know the answer, like we know this one is C, or you don't, you still want to practice process of elimination. What I mean by that is, you don't want to go hunting for the right answer. Okay, if you haven't heard this yet, the AP exam's directions for the multiple choice are very clear. They say, choose the best answer. And that's important to keep in mind. Maybe in a lower level class or in a lower grade, you kind of got trained with multiple choice, thinking that there was one and only one right answer. And all the other answers were very wrong. And if you were a good memorizer, you memorized right answers, you probably did well in those multiple choice tests. But AP is different. AP is going to challenge you a little bit more, and there are going to be maybe a couple, maybe 3 answers that are sort of right, or have elements of the truth in them. You're pressed to find the best answer. And the only way to do that is through process of elimination, by finding the worst answer and eliminating it first. Okay. So what I recommend you do when studying, and then you'll apply these same skills when taking the tests. When studying with multiple choice, choose an answer you know to be wrong, that you would eliminate first. Make sure that you can explain to yourself why it's wrong. Okay. In doing that, in explaining why an answer is wrong, you will further develop that knowledge. You'll solidify your knowledge of the material. And it's worth doing because while this question number 6 is a pretty basic question, I could totally see a question like this on the AP exam. All the answer choices are going to make you think beyond the question. They're going to make you think about more stuff. And so, students often ask me, how many questions do I need to study with to be ready? And my answer is always the more the better. Of course, that's a teacher answer, right? The more the better. The point is, you don't have to study with tons of these. This one question, number 6, may help reinforce, may help us review and think about many, many topics or many things for this exam. And so if we do this the right way, if we use the right method, we maybe only have to study with 10 or 15 or 20 questions and be ready. Okay. So that's why we take the time to pick the wrong answer out, think about why it's wrong. So I might choose B and say, well, I know B is wrong because under the Articles of Confederation, there really was no president. Okay. It says the president's decisions could be overridden by state legislatures. There is no president. That makes no sense under the Articles of Confederation. I might look at E in the same light. The federal courts were granted only limited jurisdictions. Well, there were no federal courts under the article, no national judiciary. I said that earlier when I was thinking about provisions. Okay? Now, I might look at A and say, representation in Congress was based on states' populations. No, I remember that under the Articles of Confederation, there was just one body, Congress was just one body, and each state was equal. They all had one vote. And of course, that idea, equal representation of the states under the Articles, and then that ultimately led to the Great Compromise and the Constitution. That's a big idea itself. That could be another question. So see, by looking at A, thinking about A, even though it's the wrong one, kind of reviewing another idea that could help me with another question on the test. So now it looks like I'm down to C or D. And I know many of you tell me all the time, I can always get it down to 2, but I can never pick the best one. That skill, I do have some tips and tricks for doing that, and that'll be in another video. But for right now, what you might want to do if you get down to 2 is you might want to look and say, okay, they're telling me C's the best answer, so D's wrong. Do I see why D is wrong? Do I understand what's wrong with D? States could not tax one another's trade goods. Now, I might say, I have no idea. And maybe that's something I want to look up. Or maybe I might say, well, no, under the Articles, all states were sovereign. All states, they were like their own little countries. So, they probably could tax one another's trade goods. They probably could put a tax on goods being brought in from other states. So that's probably not true. Okay? Or I might say, we talked a lot about the Articles of Confederation. I know many provisions. I don't remember any discussion of whether or not states could tax each other's trade goods under the Articles. So that just doesn't seem that important. And that might be a reason to eliminate it. It doesn't seem like it's that important an idea. Okay? But the last step, so the final step of studying with multiple choice, is to now look at that best answer and ask yourself, do I understand why this is the best answer? Do I understand what C means? And if I do, I want to think about it just for a second and really lock this idea in. While these questions that I'm sharing with you on my website are not often or probably never, am I giving you ones that come from the College Board? These are not what I like to call AP caliber questions. Nevertheless, they're from sources that know what they're talking about. If this is a question they're giving you, and this is an answer they're providing, there's a pretty good chance that this is important. I would say you don't want to go into this particular test without recognizing that under the Articles of Confederation, the central government, in other words, Congress, could not levy taxes. That is a basic fact that we all should know about the Articles. And that is one of the main reasons that central government was so weak. It didn't have the ability to tax. And if a government doesn't have the ability to tax, then it has no revenue. And if it has no money, it can't really do anything else. Okay? So when you boil it all down, this is a very basic idea and a question we certainly want to get right on the test or on the AP exam. And what we did here was we studied so much more with this question. That's why I love this method, because I think it's doing two things. Okay, maybe you don't realize it, but if you study this way, you're doing two things. Number one, you're studying the material. You're seeing what you know and what you don't know. Maybe you're learning some more as you go. You're getting really rock solid on your grasp of the material. And of course, that's key to doing well. But it's also doing, and maybe this is more subtle, is it is helping you really develop good multiple choice test skills. It's helping you practice the skill of arriving at the best answer. I tell students all the time that in order to do well on the AP exam, there's two keys. One, you got to know your stuff. You got to know the material. There's no getting around it. You have to know government. You have to know history. But that alone isn't enough. You have to practice and develop the skills of multiple choice, the skills of writing, so that you can show what you know. Studying with multiple choice, I think, enables you to do both. Hit down the material and really develop the skills. So I hope you're willing to commit yourself to this type of studying. I hope you'll see quickly that it does work. And I'm always willing to work with you more on these skills and help you get better at it.